So today's webinar is about essential practices for managers, supervisors in unionized environments. So if you guys understood any French, you probably understood that I did participate in preparing this webinar with you today with my colleague Pierre, who is the expert, and he will be facilitating the great majority of this webinar, but I've been in a unionized environment almost all of my professional life, as someone who was part of a union or as a manager supervisor with unionized staff. So I'm still learning a lot. My experience is great, but I'm still learning a lot in this webinar. So why this webinar? Well, we're here to discuss something really important today: how to better collaborate with unions. Basically, this is the main goal of this webinar. We're going to focus on how we could enhance our collaboration skills, clarify maybe some basic roles and obligations to reduce conflicts, and to really improve our work environment when we're in a union. I'm going to have difficulty pronouncing that word, in a unionized environment. So we will explore how we build stronger and more respectful relationships with our union colleagues. So by the end of this session, you'll have, I hope, practical tips and strategies to take back to your teams and to actually put into practice in your own work environment. So this webinar is to strengthen your skills, improve union management and more synergistic collaboration, reduce conflicts, reduce legal risks, clarify obligations and roles, and optimize the work environment by establishing stable and respectful relationships. So let's dive right in and get started with a quick quiz. We just want to know who's in the room today. So who's with us? So we have two questions regarding your experience with unions. So let's go ahead. Let's join at Slido. Just take a picture of the QR code that you see on your screen. I'm going to do it as you do it too, just to make sure that it works. All right. Oops. So two questions, click on send, and then we'll be good to go. All right. So who's with us? Let's see who's with us so far. So what is your level of experience with unions? So all of you, it's unanimous. We deal with unions regularly on a regular basis. And how is that experience? Well, so far your experience is described as somewhat positive, and for some of you, very negative. So let's try and put that to a very positive experience by the end of this webinar. All right. So what's on the agenda? A few notes on understanding unions, so a few definitions. Most of the webinar is focused on employee-employer relationships and on essential practices or best strategies to use to put into place in a unionized environment. We'll end with a few traps and risks and tips and impacts and a few notes on our upcoming training. So just before we dig in, when we talk about working in a unionized environment, there are management and leadership expectations. If this is not your first webinar with us, you've probably seen this diagram before. But really, when we work effectively with unions, it really helps us hit several key targets in this diagram. So first of all, when we look at the upper part of the diagram, what leaders and board expect from me as a leader manager. So from a unionized point of view, in respect to our theme today, it aligns perfectly with the organization's goal. So when we engage unions constructively with discussions and regarding some really important decisions that will affect their membership or their member, we can really drive our mission forward and keep everyone moving in the same direction. So that's linked with the upper expectations. If I go on the left of the diagram, what other management colleagues could expect from me when I'm a leader manager working with unions? Well, I think we've all had that experience before. Nothing is more frustrating for employees or a union than when managers act independently in systemic initiatives or in compliance with the collective agreement. So there's an article in the collective agreement and I use it in my own way, or there's a systemic project going on and I go ahead with it in my own way. So when we're misaligned, or worse, when we don't respect approaches or expectations that were that are part of an alignment in an organization, that often leads to conflicts, ambiguities, and really concerns and questions. So the expectation here is to respect the collective agreement and respect systemic initiatives. From an employee's point of view, every time that I have a clear communication and that I collaborate with unions, when this is a continuous way of doing things, it means that everyone knows what is expected. And when everyone is on the same page and we all have a common understanding of things, it really helps foster an atmosphere where cooperation and collaboration is present, and it makes it so much easier to handle performance issues or collaboration issues fairly. And last but not least, I'm on the right side of the diagram. Personally, what's in it for me when I work or when the collaboration with the unions is positive? Well, it makes my job a lot more satisfying. There is less conflict, there is less stress, and it really helps me maintain a good work-life balance. So it's a win all around. Better for our mission, better for our team, and better for our personal job satisfaction. So there we go. Unions and leadership and management expectations. I'm gonna now leave it to you, Pierre, to help us understand unions a little bit better.
Micheline. And I don't know if I missed it, but if participants have any questions, please shoot it in the chat and we'll address them while we do the presentation. All of you work with unions, so I suspect that you have the basics, if not the fundamentals pinned down. So some of this might be repetition, but it's always good to hear things a second time and to discuss it or even debate it. So again, don't hesitate to use the chat. So what is a union? A union is an organization formed by workers or employees to protect and promote their collective interests. Union act as representative of the workers with employers, negotiate work conditions such as wages, benefits, schedules.
Oops, Pierre, I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear you anymore.
Of this. Okay. So I was saying that unions play a role in defending workers' rights, workplace safety, and resolving conflicts between employers and employees. In summary, the raison d'être of a union is to improve working conditions and protect the rights and privileges of its members. That being said, the employer's management right should not be overlooked. The employer maintains all rights to manage the workplace environment, except for those issues that are limited or framed by the collective agreement and, of course, relevant legislation. For example, The practice of granting vacation leave according to needs of employers remains intact, notwithstanding the addition in the collective agreement of a seniority clause. However, if the agreement stipulates that leave is granted based on seniority, then of course you have no choice but to apply it. Next, Michelin.
Yeah.
Oops. Okay, here I go. So what is a union? To sum it up, unions have three principal roles: collectively represent employees, negotiate collective agreements, and protect employees' rights. The roles and responsibilities of a union are statutory. They are governed by Labor Relations Act or its equivalent legislation depending on the province. So what is a union representative or union delegate? Well, it's a person designated by the union to represent its interests and those of the unionized employees.
Pierre, for some reason, I don't hear you anymore.
That's strange.
Yeah, it
How about
is.
now?
Yes, I
So I
do.
have to sort of demute and mute. So you hear me now?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Um, so a union delegate is an employee member of the bargaining unit covered by the collective agreement. You will also have regional representatives or provincial or even federal representative, but that depends on the union and the issues that are to be discussed in about workplace um, litige concerns or causes. Often the union representative is elected by the unionized employees of the workplace. It's very important for management to know officially who is and who is not a union representative. A union representative has certain rights that regular employees do not have. We'll get more on this later. What is management rights? Well, the power conferred to the employer to direct its activities while respecting the provisions of the collective agreement. In principle, the employer maintains all its management rights except those framed or limited by the terms of the collective agreement and relevant laws. Managers, supervisors have the right to manage their operations and make decisions regarding daily management, staff, work processes, etc. However, this right must be exercised within the limits of the collective agreement. So I think now we're at the Slido.
Yes, I was just looking in the chat. I don't see any questions, so just let's go to the Slido and see what is your level of understanding of unions. I can almost foresee a very positive, a very good understanding of unions. I think this is
Yes.
really basic, and most of our participants are dealing on a regular basis with unions, so I'm guessing the understanding will be quite high. Okay, so let's see what kind of results we have. Oh, well, it's unanimous. So it's not a perfect understanding, but it's a pretty good understanding of unions. So that is good. So I'm not going to waste any time on that. Let's just continue with the employee-employer relationship, which is at the heart of this webinar.
Probably no. There's two hats for the manager leader vis-a-vis a delegate, a union representative, and who's also an employee. As a union representative, the manager leader has a peer relationship with the union rep. That's based on jurisprudence flowing from arbitral arbitrage, like um, the English terms, it's excuse me, but it's jurisprudence from arbitrators' decisions that creates or frames this peer relationship. A union delegate becomes your peer when they play the role. That's why it's important to know who is and who is not a union representative in your workplace. The role of a delegate is distinct and separate from the role as an employee. The relationship with the manager leader is one of a peer. In the hierarchical relationship, that's a word that's a tongue twister for me. Uh, if not a union business, the delegate is in their role as an employee. This relationship touches on aspects of organizational power or authority, work supervision, performance evaluation, decision making. As an example to separate the two here, let's talk about a situation of insubordination. In the peer relationship, so supervisor, manager, leader with the union rep, when the union representative argues, interrupts, questions a supervisor while working on a union case, this is not insubordination. The supervisor can just say, I'm ignoring you, go back to work. You can't because it's a peer relationship. However, in the supervisor employee role relationship, the feedback on an employee's work um, cannot and the sorry, when you're giving feedback on an employee's work and this employee sort of takes exception for that, starts arguing, etc., this could be cause for disciplinary action based on insubordination. The peer relationship is often misunderstood, but it's very important. And many employers have lost grievances because they did not respect that relationship. How to navigate effectively in a unionized environment while maintaining good working relationship. Key points to remember. The manager leader must understand the collective agreement and properly respect employees' rights. Letting things slide can create limits for the future. For example, being late for work, ways of working, actions and privileges. As you know, being in an environment with unions, if you let things slide, this can be cause for setting a precedent over and beyond the collective agreement. It is crucial to respect the terms of the collective agreement in both its letter and spirit. As I said, otherwise you risk setting a precedent.
And Pierre, if I may
Example,
here, it does make so much sense because I remember in my previous professional life, in a school board, for example. So there's one collective agreement for all teachers. But if I were to interpret or apply the collective agreement in a way, and my colleague just across town would apply it another way, it would really cause some friction and some misinterpretations, and we would never be surprised to see that article in the collective agreement being discussed or being an issue in the next bargaining table.
yes, that often happens, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And an example of this is also the both collective agreements will have a special leave for urgent reason provision. For example, an employee calls and says the basement is flooded, he has to look after it right away, and he requests a special leave for urgent reason. Well, that can be justified, and the employer would not be setting a negative precedent for allowing that person to assume the special leave provision. However, let's say an employee calls and says, my God, I'm behind in my Christmas shopping. I only have 1 day left. It's a really an emergency. I have to take this leave. Well, in my opinion, special leave for urgent reason doesn't qualify here. If a manager would grant that leave, then there's a great risk of setting the precedent that special leave for urgent reason becomes special leave, period. So the intention of urgency, which is often not discussed at the bargaining table, so you may not specifically know the intention, but in the majority of cases, the arbitrator will accept that the intention of urgency is for unforeseeable situation. It is the management right to interpret the collective agreement, and the union has a responsibility to challenge the interpretation via the grievance procedure. So that's also part of management rights.
So it's a right. Uh, I'm guessing it's also responsibility, but if I'm in a large organization, in your experience, Pierre, how do we get to be on the same page regarding the interpretation of some, not all articles, because I'm guessing that not all articles are easy to misinterpret or are very large, but what would you suggest if I'm in a large organization, and what's a good practice to be on the same page regarding the interpretation?
Well, my suggestion would be to have somebody in HR department or a high level management position who define what is urgent reason. And that can be defined by making up a list. What is considered urgent, what is not considered urgent. And that list can be updated on a yearly basis because situations come up that we haven't met before. So that's a very important tool to ensure that all managers across the organization will interpret that clause in the same manner and reduce the risks of setting negative precedents.
Okay, good point. Thank you.
More key points to remember. If an employee does not comply with a provision of a collective agreement and you notice it without taking action, you become responsible for that action. Managers have the right to direct their operations, make decisions regarding day-to-day management. However, this right must be exercised within the limits established by the collective agreement. If an employee believes that his rights are being violated, he or she must obey now, grieve later. That's a basic principle, also flowing from arbitral jurisprudence. What does it mean?
Yeah, okay, yeah. What does that mean?
If the employee does not adhere to this principle, they may be subject to disciplinary action for insubordination. For example, changing the break time. Supervisor says from now on, instead of taking breaks from 10:30 to 10:45, the breaks will be at 11 a.m. For whatever reason, as long as it's a reasonable management operational reason. Even if the employee is right and objects to the change of the break time, he or she must respect the directive and pursue his concern through agreements at a later time. The employee does not have the right to ignore the directive. So that comes back to the principle of obey now, grieve later.
Okay, I get it.
There are exceptions to obey now, grieve later, and one that comes to mind are a situation of health and safety. An employee can refuse to work if there's a risk to his or her health, but that's covered by the health and safety legislation.
Okay, good.
More key points to remember. Maintain effective and transparent communication. Clarity in exchange is key. Provide precise, consistent, and understandable information. Active listening. Be receptive to the concerns of delegates or the employees. Neutrality. Communicate in an objective manner and avoid biases in discussions. More key points. It's a good practice to cultivate collaboration and a partnership. Establish positive relationship. Foster a climate of respect, trust, and cooperation with the delegates. Encourage consultation. Involve unions in decisions directly affecting employees within the limits of the collective agreement. Align the objectives, alignment of the objectives. Work together to achieve common goals while respecting organizational needs.
I think, Pierre, and I think we'll see this one in the traps, but personally, this one has been the biggest for me because it does take time to cultivate that partnership. But once I finally understood the importance of being a partner, I actually compared it one day to like this is gonna sound odd, but to a divorced couple, right? So when a couple is divorced, the kids really know who to ask things and how to get favors and so on because they know that, especially when the relationship is tense and they're it's not the couple is not acting as a partnership anymore. But when people are on the same page and that the collaboration is strong, the partnership is strong, the more you are able to communicate and collaborate on difficult issues.
Yes, that's a good point. It also happens in uh, couples that are not divorced. Kids are masters at negotiating parents
Yeah,
against each other.
yeah, that is true too. So let's see. We've come up with a summary of do's and don'ts. You want to go over those, please?
Sure. Oops.
So the first columns are the do's. I'm just going to put them out there. There are 5 do's, and then we'll go to the 5 don'ts.
Okay, so the do's. Communicate clearly. Maintain open and regular communication with union reps. Respect the agreement. Adhere strictly to the collective agreement. Collaborate. Works constructively with unions to solve problems. Educate. Train on union rights and labor laws. Acknowledge. Validate the contribution and concern of the unionized employees. So the don'ts. Ignore grievances. Do not neglect delay responding to employee complaints. If you ignore agreements, the dispute will go to arbitration. And you know what that means. It's a very long, arduous, and expensive process. Decide unilaterally. Avoid making decisions affecting working conditions without prior consultation. Now, this being said, consultation can be a two-way sword. You have the right to make if you have the right to make certain decisions, you can consult on how to implement it. If you consult on the legitimacy of the decision, you risk eroding your management right.
That is
Under,
such a good point. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but that is such a good point because I'm hearing all the questions that we usually get at Discadis regarding management rights and how to deal with employees and change management and resistance and so on. And I think the word consultation is so much all encompassing that we think that consultation is asking peers or employees, are you okay with this? Do you agree with this? As consultation, um, doesn't mean because you consult that you're consultating your team that you haven't made your decisions. But to me, where I've gone wrong so many times in the past was doing a consultation while my decision had already been made. And I was doing a consultation in the hope that people or employees would just have an opinion that was aligned with the decision that I had made. Then when I learned that consultation was way much more than that, it was here, gang, this is the decisions that we've made regarding, I don't know, schedules or whatever. And the consultation was more about implementation. How can this be a success for us? Or just asking the question, what reassures you and what worries you about this decision or this implementation? That allowed us to have so much more rich conversations about real issues.
yes, and that goes to clarity as well, because it's okay to say to union, the objective or the decision is not negotiable. How we get there, let's talk about it. So
Yeah,
it's clear what the frame of the discussion is. It's
yeah,
not
the
the what,
what and
it's
the
the how.
how. Yeah,
Correct, exactly. Don't underestimate the union. Not underestimate their role nor their influence. I remember I was a spokesperson in negotiating table representing the employer, and they were on the verge of the first strike. The head honcho of the organization kept on saying, "Don't worry, the employees won't go on strike. They love working here. They know we're a good employer. We pay good wages, etc., etc." However, you have to remember that the employees voted to be unionized. They want a representative, and they believe in their union. They're not always on the same wavelength, but between choosing the employer and choosing the union, 9 times out of 10, the employees will respect their union's decision or opinion or advice. So do not underestimate the role of the union, even if sometimes you'll hear employees speaking against the union. Open conflict. Avoid unnecessary direct confrontation with union representative. If you're going to have a debate or disagree with union, do it behind closed door. You don't want the employees to get involved for all kinds of reasons. Violation of rights. Never violate the legal rights workers recognized by the agreement. That goes beyond saying, but you wouldn't believe the times that you end up fighting a grievance because there was a right that was not respected or ignored.
good reminders and good tips here on do's and don'ts, Pierre. Thank you so much. So I don't see any questions or comments in the chat, so let's just move along with another quiz. So having gone briefly with the do's, don'ts, strategies to put in place in work environments, how would you assess your ability to navigate in a unionized environment? Where are you at today? Let's join on Slido. Have a few answers coming in. So we're very different. So for some of us, we have some challenges. For others, we have capacities that are very good. Yeah, we're just in different places, and that might be influenced by the employees, by the delegate, by the union. How do you react, Pierre, to the results that you see on the screen?
Oh, it's typical because even if relationship is positive with the union, it's not easy. You mentioned earlier that it takes time to cultivate a relationship. Managers, supervisors are busy, they've got a job to do, and they also have to deal with the union relationship. Also, it's often the question of relationship. And let's face it, sometimes union representative can be hard to deal with. And if you ask the question of a union representative, they'll say, well, sometimes a management representative is hard to deal with. So it does come down to relationship. And sometimes some personalities are more difficult to deal with, but it shouldn't, you should remain focused on the do's and don'ts and the winning practices. Yeah, it's typical.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. So let's continue. We've prepared a few traps and risks of falling into those traps and a few tips and impacts. So the first one is communication with the delegate. And you've already tapped a bit into this one, Pierre, but the trap is to assume that the goals of the union rep or the delegate are always in a position to those of management. So that's a trap to take for granted that we never see eye to eye on some issues. And if we assume that we're really that we're always in a position, defensive or confrontational approach from the beginning of discussions, it makes the debate so much harder. And it can actually harm the relationship and make problem solving more difficult. So if you take for granted that I'm going to be in a position with you, or if I take for granted that the union rep will always disagree with me or see it differently, well, it's easy to see how confrontational the approach and the relationship could be. And I fall into this trap in my previous life. So the tip here is to adopt an open and collaborative communication approach. Just taking time to understand the concerns and goals of the delegate. So developing the art of questioning, what is the main concern here? What are you expecting out of this situation? In an ideal world, how would this be solved? But just to have an open ear and be curious enough to understand what are the union reps or delegates' ideas before responding or making a decisions. And after trying this, I was surprisingly, I noticed that more often than not, we're on the same page regarding some issues. It's the way we handle them that is different. But basically, the end in mind is usually pretty much common. So proposing regular meetings to discuss ongoing issues and anticipating potential problems. And I have an image that I want to put out here. It's like a bank account. I think I could compare it to that. I'm going to be in the red if I always withdraw from my bank account without never depositing anything in it or any money in it. So I think it's a bit like that with the union rep or the delegate. If I can make some deposit, and deposit means I communicate, I I listen for concerns, I consult when making decisions that will touch a large portion of their members. I tap into their ideas. To me, those are deposits. So when it's time to do a withdrawal, so to make a difficult decision or to, tackle a more difficult issues, I think that the collaboration and communication should go better just because I've taken the time to make some deposits. The impact, by establishing a constructive, open, and ongoing dialogue and showing mutual respect for each other's objectives, we can create a more collaborative environment that often leads to more creative and acceptable solutions for all parties involved.
So true, Micheline. And, it reminds me of a situation where communication was really non-existent between the supervisor and the union rep. When the union would challenge the process of a performance evaluation, which happened to be in the collective agreement, but that's another story. Then the supervisor would say, "Of course, you're challenging the process. We know that unions defend incompetence." Or then, if there was the union filed agreements because the schedule was not respected, then that same manager would say, "Of course, you're putting in grievance. We know that unions defend laziness." That person did not understand that your union, first of all, has a legal obligation, not a right, an obligation to defend the rights of employees. But he did not understand or did not want to understand that the union was defending the rights, not necessarily the individual. And that's a very important concept as well. And you have to understand that as a supervisor, you have to respect that, and then go beyond that and go into a problem solving mode, which is facilitated with what you've just shared with us in terms of good communication with delegate.
Good point. Good point. All right. Next trap is about contributions of union delegates. And again, I think you've mentioned it briefly before, Pierre, but the trap is to minimize the role of union delegates in communication and problem solving. Oh, it's just a
Mhm.
union. I'm the manager. I can do whatever I want. The risk, ignoring their contribution, can compromise the smoothness and effectiveness of communication. It could create a feeling of discontent. So it's just the delegate, it's just the union. So minimizing an individual or the role of an individual rarely encourages collaboration and problem solving because we're on opposite camps and someone is perceived as being less than the other one. So the tip is to actively integrate delegates into preliminary discussions and formally acknowledge their contributive role. So keep them in the loop is, I think the tip is saying here. The impact, finding and retaining more sustainable and effective solutions. So keeping them informed, keeping them in the loop, having an ear to what they have to say, especially if the first trap is not there and you see them more as partners than as opposition. I don't know if you have anything to add to this trap here.
No, it goes a bit of what the first one said, and this one makes the point about communication and problem solving. Again, you can consult on problem solving, but please be uh, remind yourself who has the right to make the decision. Don't delegate or problem solve on your decision. Problem solve on the way to implement your decision.
Yeah. Again, the what and the how. The what is
Yes.
yours. The how is where to recognize their contribution and to have the communication about the how. All right, so this is we're almost at the end of this webinar. There are a few more free trainings in April. The first one, if you're a board member, it might interest you, is the 5 Habits of a Responsible Board, and that is tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And on April 22nd, there's another free training is about change management and emotional intelligence. And the two are inseparable because change management is not about as much as products as managing attitudes, humors, and real people. So change management and emotional intelligence. So that's on April 22nd. Um, if you would, there are more trainings related to this webinar that are available on our website. There's actually a half day and a full day training that is possible, and it's called Unions and Labor Relations, which is more tailored to your organization. There's also discovering my natural management style. So as a manager, how do I show up and how do I motivate and appreciate and delegate with the employees that I have? There's the whole day of training on change management, which is actually the work of leaders. And whenever we talk about labor relations and we have employees to manage and supervise, there's the fourth one that is really, really popular right now that is called cultivating accountability, one conversation at a time. So either with a delegate or an employee, how do we have those difficult conversations? How do we get to be more comfortable with them is mostly what this training is about. And if you're not new to our webinars, we usually, in the past, we used to send them in a follow-up email the day after, a few days after a webinar. So there are no more follow-up emails. You need to be enrolled on our newsletter to actually get the webinars recordings. So if you haven't enrolled yet, enroll via the QR code. And if you would like to talk more about your own challenges, either working with a union or any other challenges that you might have, you can always book a free meeting with one of our experts. And again, just use the QR code that you see on your screen to do that. And that's it. We're done for today, folks.